Hey guys, what's going on? And welcome to another video. Hope you guys are doing well today. So in this video we're going to be talking about the disparity between the Mythic Plus affixes. So this week we've got Tyrannical, Raging, Explosive and Prideful. And it seems like it shouldn't be a hard week, but Tyrannical in itself makes it so much harder, and runs that were 3-chestable last week are just almost impossible to do this week. In any way of the same speed or kind of proficiency, I guess. So I'm going to talk through all the different affixes at the moment. I'm going to kind of give them a rating between kind of 1 and 10. And we're going to just see the disparity between what the bottom tier is, what the push weeks are, and the top end weeks, the weeks that we're getting all the hard affixes and it's just an impossible run. So I'm just going to talk about Prideful first. Prideful is one of those kind of things that, if played well, is actually a DPS and speed increase. Despite the fact you have to spend time killing it, it's one of those things that the damage buff you get should allow you to gain more time back than the time you spent killing it, which is great. So all in all, it should be a good thing. I really like Prideful. I think it's enough of a healing challenge to make it doable but not impossible. It's also enough of a DPS check as well. It does everything, and it does give you a buff, which is really nice. If played correctly, I'm not having to drink an entire Mythic Plus run at the moment, which is really, really nice. I'm just seeing that the footage is a little bit laggy this week. I do apologise for that. I'm not quite sure what's going on. I am recording all this on a laptop, so that may be why. But let's get into the level 2 affixes. These are the affixes that take place in all Mythic Plus keys, no matter the level. They are Tyrannical and Fortified. You'll never really see, especially at the moment, a Tyrannical week can be considered a push week. And that's just because the bosses take so long, they force so many mechanics, and some of them just do things that make them almost unkillable. So as an example of tyrannical bosses that are very difficult, you look at the last boss in Plagueful. On a normal run, that boss can still be quite annoying because the tentacle things are quite poorly animated as to where they're going to hit. They have changed it slightly to make it a little bit easier, but still a little bit frustrating. The infectious rain off that boss, though, is brutal in terms of what it can actually, the damage it puts out. If you get 2 or 3 rains per phase, it's very, very difficult to actually heal through that. To a point, it's almost getting impossible at the higher keys. I ran a Plagueful 15 this week, and we had 3 rains per transition. I was having to heal kind of 8-9k plus HPS to be able to heal through that, which is fine on the first one, maybe the second one if I've got a cooldown, but when you're having to do that 9-10 times in a fight, you just can't keep that level of healing up without going out of mana. And at that point, we were just not able to kill it quick enough. And part of that is to do with our DPS. We didn't have the best single target DPS. But I feel like Tyrannical really emphasizes that whole meta of this is what you must bring to a key. You need a balanced druid that can pull 20k burst. You need a monk to do lots of single target DPS as well. You then look at Fortified in comparison, and all mobs in the dungeon, barring bosses, have up to 20% more health and up to 30% more damage, and there are some hard trash packs. However, everything is dealable. Everything is manageable because you have things like CC. Ultimately, you can play around Fortified much more than you can play around Tyrannical. And I think that's why it's just imbalanced. I would rather bosses have a baseline, maybe 10-15% more health, to stop the fact that on a 15 key we're killing a boss in 40 seconds with the same meta classes, but bring Tyrannical down a little bit so the jump doesn't feel so big in them weeks. We then start getting into the level 4 affixes. So this is affixes that will occur in any key from level 4 upwards. So you have Sanguine, Bursting, Bolstering, and Teaming. Now I haven't actually seen a Teaming week yet. I believe it still is a affix in Shadowlands, but we haven't seen one yet. So I'm going to go into Bolstering. Bolstering is one of those things that with a coordinated group, you will almost ignore. With a pug group, it will wipe you. Bolstering is something that, with good organisation, you should kill all the mobs at around the same sort of time, and you won't leave anything super bolstered. And if it is, it should just be for the last 2 or 3% of its health. In a pug, you will have to nuke certain things down. It's going to be very difficult with that on bolstering, so it's one of those that in a pug group I would say it's quite difficult. In an organised group I'd say it's manageable. Bursting, I've not actually noticed bursting be too much of an issue. It's dispellable, which means a priest is amazing that week. It really does emphasise bringing something like a Disc Priest, Holy Priest, or Shadow. All of them are good right now for certain things. Bursting just makes him that much better. But it's one of those things that I would say it's probably a 1 on difficulty. Ultimately, you don't want to stack it super, super high, but it's manageable. I may have to use a cooldown slightly later just to manage bursting stacks, but that's the only difference to my gameplay as a healer. As a DPS, you kind of want to stagger mobs, even if that means you don't DPS for 2 or 3 seconds just to let the stacks fall off. Happy day, stacks are falling off, you can kill the rest of the mobs. Very easy to manage in both a pug and a coordinated group, and I just don't think it's that much of an issue right now. You then go to Sanguine. Sanguines, I actually enjoyed Sanguine Week when I wasn't playing Elemental. Now, there are some classes it really does punish because they put their AoE on the floor. Things like Marksman Hunters, a lot of their damage is based around Wild Spirits, which is on the floor. If you kill one mob really quickly, unfortunately that means you're gonna have to move, or the tank's gonna have to move or kite around, and it's going to make that much more annoying to put your DPS out as an Elemental Chamois putting Earthquakes on the floor. It's all quite frustrating, unfortunately. But Sanguine as an affix in itself, you can play around it. It's not horrible. It makes Sanguine Depths, ironically, one of the hardest dungeons just because of the Gauntlet. But again, if you play that correctly, you kill all the mobs over to one side, then move over to the other. There are ways to manage that. You then get into Raging. Raging is one of those, we're playing it this week for the first time in Shadowlands. It's not horrible. I have seen tanks get one shot as a whole group hits 30%, and that's the issue, is as a pug, if you nuke everything down to 30% at the same time, the tanks can spike really low really quickly, and while Hunters and Druids are both meta classes, it's unfortunately one of those that isn't going to be... You can't trank shot everything. You can't soothe everything. It has a cooldown. So unfortunately, while Raging isn't the hardest affix, it's made harder in pugs as opposed to coordinated groups, which may nuke down like certain priority targets. So to go through them again, teaming we haven't seen yet, so I'm not going to rate that one. Bolstering, it's probably 3 or a 4. Honestly, it's not horrible. It can be played around. It really punishes mistakes a lot more. Bursting, I would put a 1, maybe a 2. Sanguine, I would put, again, around a 4 or 5 out of 10. And Raging, again, I'd say 4 or 5. It's playable. You can make sure it's done correctly to at least impact your tank. With the tank meta being a lot of kiting right now, Raging isn't as big as an issue as people seem to make it believe. On Fortified, obviously, with extra damage on the ads, it's going to hit a lot harder. We then go up to the level 7 affixes, so Explosive, Quaking, Necrotic, Volcanic, and Grievous. There is also Skittish and Overflowing. I'm not sure if they exist right now. There's also Spiteful, Inspiring, and Storming, which I'll talk about in a minute as well, which is the new affixes this season. But Explosive, very easily managed, very easily punished. If you make mistakes and you don't kill the explosives, you're going to die to them. They're going to do a lot of damage. If you just kill the explosives, it's not a problem. There are plenty of classes that can manage it very easily. It may impact your overall DPS. But again, in a coordinated group, you're not going to care about that. It's about getting the dungeon done. In a pug group, you may have impacts. Me as an Elemental Chamois, Frost Shock is amazing for explosives, but I have had groups complain that I'm not putting enough damage. All in all, it's not too much of an issue. Quaking, again, it's always been one of those that's considered a push affix. It's not hard enough that it impacts you massively, and it's definitely manageable. You just have to make sure you spread out. There's a lot of places in this expansion in dungeons that don't allow that. Sanguine Depths, Gauntlet springs to mind, Theatre of Pain on the platforms. You don't get all too much space. That's kind of the same for Sanguine as well. But if you can manage Sanguine in terms of the distances, you can manage Quaking. Necrotic, I actually found Necrotic, we had that, I think it was last week, it wasn't all too difficult. Tanks just had to kite, but as that's the meta at the moment anyway, it didn't really have a major impact on the gameplay. Volcanic, again, is something that's a ranged only mechanic that you can almost entirely ignore. Grievous, with the Grievous changes now, being able to insta-heal or direct heal the stacks off. If someone gets really high amounts of Grievous damage, you can just spam them and get that Grievous cleared, which is really, really nice. I do like that change. So all of the level 7 affixes, I don't think any of them are particularly horrible. I think they're all doable. So we then get into Inspiring, Storming, and Spiteful. Storming is horrible. It was supposed to be Blizzard's answer to Volcanic for melee. Was the original idea. The idea was that instead of range, just people bringing 3 range during a Volcanic week, you would have Storming, which kind of balances things out a little bit. Which it kind of does. It does impact melee more than ranged, but they reached ranged as well, and they're just annoying. There are places in Shadowlands you just cannot avoid Storming, unfortunately. So it's not one I particularly like. It's probably one of the harder affixes of the base affixes. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely manageable though. Inspiring, some non-boss enemies have an inspiring presence that strengthens their allies. It just stops people being CC'd. This is dealable by CCing that one mob by itself. You kite the rest away, or focusing that one mob and killing them. This is an affix that by itself isn't all too much of an issue. You can manage it. It's probably one of the harder ones. But if you combine it with something else like bolstering, it's going to be a bit of an issue because it can bolster something, and it can then, obviously, if you focus that one mob, it's going to bolster everything else. If you don't bolster that one mob, it's going to inspire everything else. So it's kind of, which one do you prefer? So I think it's something that is probably one of the harder ones in combination with other pulls. Spiteful is something that annoys me that it just doesn't get managed very well. Ultimately, if you just pull away from a pack after you've killed it, which you should be doing anyway to run into the next pack, drop a slow, drop an Earthbind totem, drop a stun, drop anything, you can really just ignore Spiteful. You only have to kill them if you want to stay still for a second. The only time I killed Spiteful that week that we've had it so far was during Prideful, when we had to stay still and wait for Prideful to spawn and things like that. Other than that, we just ignored it, really, on most pulls. So we go through that entire list. There are some that are difficult, that are made more difficult by other affixes. My biggest example would be Inspiring and Bolstering. Them two together is kind of, they counter each other, what you want to do. The biggest issue at the moment is that any Tyrannical week just makes the game feel unplayable for High Mythic Plus keys. And don't get me wrong, I know people are doing High Mythic Plus keys this week. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm not saying it's impossible in that it can't be done. I'm saying if you take a pug group and try to do any Mythic Plus key above a 13, 14, 15 right now, and you're not all pulling 6k DPS on bosses, 5k DPS on bosses, it just feels like it takes so long that one mistake will then force a group to wipe, or force a group to take 4 minutes instead of 3 minutes, and that does make a huge difference. So I think Tyrannical is really the biggest one for me, that it really needs changing to allow these push weeks, to allow the weeks to be a little bit closer in terms of being able to play. I know a lot of Mythic Plus players this week who have done 115 key and they're just not logging on till next Wednesday. Next Wednesday we have a really, really nice Mythic Plus week, and I know Mythic Plus players that are going to be doing hundreds of keys next week. And it really does change things. So yeah, let me know what you guys think. It's been a little bit longer video than I was intending, but I've gone through all the affixes, talked about the difficulty of them. I don't think it's any at the moment that's really too difficult. If you guys have any different opinions, please let me know in the comments. But other than that, there'll be a new video tomorrow. I'm having some issues with my account at the moment. I've just had my Battle.net switch to to my old Battle.net. So I've lost all of my Shadowlands related progress, which is a little bit sad. So yeah, there'll be a new video tomorrow. I'm just not sure what it'll be yet. Okay, thanks for watching, guys, and I'll catch you later. Bye.